Good afternoon, folks. Thanks so much for joining us for today's webinar. We are going to get started in just a few minutes here, and so just hang tight and we will get started shortly. Thanks so much. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Florida Department of Economic Opportunities, DEO, Rebuild Florida Voluntary Home Buyout Program presentation. My name is Caroline Pryor, and I'm on the Office of Disaster Recovery team at DEO. Today's presentation will provide an overview of the Rebuild Florida Voluntary Home Buyout Program for Hurricane Michael impacted communities, including application requirements, scoring criteria, and next steps for the program. Our goals for today's webinar are to provide you with more information on the Rebuild Florida Voluntary Home Buyout Program, explain the program objectives, and outline how your communities can apply for this funding. We will begin with a brief overview of the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery, CDBG-DR, funding. We will then discuss which communities are eligible for the funding and the guidelines and objectives of the Rebuild Florida Voluntary Home Buyout Program. Following the explanation of those guidelines, I will review the application process and scoring criteria that will be utilized to evaluate submitted applications. Then we will discuss opportunities for how you can receive further technical assistance from the DEO team. After that, we will take a few moments to answer your questions. As your questions arise, please type them in the question box. As a point of information, all webinar materials will be made available on the program website after today's presentation. And with that, let's get started. DEO is the primary state partner of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. We administer many HUD grant programs, which include Community Development Block Grants. The Office of Disaster Recovery is a branch within DEO that oversees CDBG-DR funding for Hurricanes Hermine, Matthew, Irma, and Michael, as well as the CDBG Mitigation Program. Rebuild Florida is a program of DEO created with federal funding to help Florida's long-term recovery efforts from the devastating impacts of storms. The CDBG-DR allocation for Hurricane Michael totals $735 million. As we are all well aware, Hurricane Michael made landfall in the Florida Panhandle in October of 2018. In May of 2019, HUD announced $448 million in CDBG-DR funding, followed by an additional $287 million in December of that year. On January 27, 2020, HUD published the Federal Register necessary for the state of Florida to develop its federally required action plan to access the funding. In February 2020, DEO hosted several public outreach meetings throughout Hurricane Michael impacted communities and hosted a webinar to seek feedback on development of the state action plan. In March 2020, DEO posted an initial draft of the state action plan for public comment and submitted the state action plan to HUD on May 14, 2020, months ahead of schedule. The state action plan was approved by HUD on June 26, 2020, and DEO announced the launch of the Rebuild Florida Voluntary Home Buyout Program on August 17th. HUD designated Bay, Calhoun, Franklin, Gadsden, Gulf, Jackson, Liberty, Wakulla, and Washington counties as most impacted and distressed, or MID areas. The state of Florida then designated an additional 3 counties, Holmes, Leon, and Taylor, as the remaining MID areas. According to the guidelines set by the Federal Register, at least 80% of the allocated funds must be spent in HUD-designated MID areas, shown in green on the map. The remaining funding can be spent in state-designated MID areas, shown in blue on the map. DEO will use the allocated funding to launch 5 disaster recovery programs in the HUD and state-designated MID areas. The Rebuild Florida General Infrastructure Repair Program, which launched on September 2nd, 2020, is designed to fund infrastructure restoration and improvement projects in communities impacted by Hurricane Michael. The Rebuild Florida Hometown Revitalization Program will support the recovery of economic activity in commercial areas of impacted towns and cities, facilitating the return and recovery of businesses, jobs, and provision of goods and services to the community. The Rebuild Florida Workforce Recovery Training Program will provide funding opportunities for local workforce development boards, educational institutions, and technical centers located in the communities most impacted by Hurricane Michael to train new workers in construction trades. The Rebuild Florida Housing Repair and Replacement Program will repair, replace, or reconstruct homes damaged by Hurricane Michael. The Rebuild Florida Voluntary Home Buyout Program, launched on August 17, 2020, is designed to encourage risk reduction through the purchase of residential property in high flood risk areas to help reduce the impact of future disasters. Local governments that are within the federal and state designated MID areas are eligible to apply for funding. As previously stated, the Rebuild Florida Voluntary Home Buyout Program opened on August 17th, and the deadline to submit an application is November 30th, 2020. The program has an allocation of $27 million, and the maximum award amount is $5 million. DEO will use a subrecipient model to administer the grant funds to eligible applicants. Subrecipients will be selected through a competitive request for application or RFA process. This program is not a direct grant program, and no funds will be paid directly to individuals. Those who are eligible to apply include counties and municipalities. Projects must benefit HUD and state-designated mid areas, and HUD's national objectives of benefiting low and moderate income or LMI persons and or unmet needs must be accounted for in all project proposals. Allowable costs for property buyout projects depend upon the scope of the project. The following costs associated with the buyout of hazard-prone real property and the demolition of structures are allowable. Market value of real property, either at the time of sale or immediately prior to Hurricane Michael, depending upon the ownership status at that time of Hurricane Michael. It should be noted that if the appraisal of the property is prior to the disaster, then all duplication of benefits, or DOB, must be subtracted from this amount unless the owner can provide proof that funds were used for another eligible purpose and should be excluded as an offset to the amount of the DOB. Additional allowable costs are demolition and removal of property, fees paid for environmental review services, and relocation costs associated with displaced tenants under the Uniform Relocation Act. Each property must meet the following qualifications. The property is purchased from a willing seller. The property contains a structure that has been damaged or destroyed due to Hurricane Michael, or the property is in a special flood hazard area, SFHA, or a high-risk flood area. All compatible easements or encumbrances can and must be extinguished. The property cannot be contaminated with hazardous materials at the time of buyout other than incidental demolition or household waste. The property cannot be part of a project area where there is an intention to use the property for any public or private future use inconsistent with the open space deed restrictions and FEMA acquisition requirements. And the property will not be subdivided prior to the buyout, except for portions outside of the identified hazard area, such as within a SFHA or any risk zone identified by FEMA. It should also be noted that properties that have received rehabilitation or repairs through the Rebuild Florida Housing Repair and Replacement Program will not be eligible for assistance under the Voluntary Home Buyout Program. DEO will apply a two-phased process to review applications. First, proposals must pass HUD CDBG-DR threshold compliance criteria. Second, DEO will review and score each proposal based on scoring criteria. If a proposal does not meet any of the threshold criteria, DEO cannot proceed to score it for funding consideration. Threshold compliance criteria include benefit to LMI individuals and benefit to LMI areas. Projects or programs must also address a clear unmet need, be tied to Hurricane Michael, and primarily serve housing activities. Once a proposal is determined to satisfy CDBG-DR's threshold compliance criteria, then DEO will apply scoring based on the following scoring criteria for a maximum of 170 points. 1. Management capacity. To meet this criteria, the subrecipient, program manager, and/or developer must demonstrate program, case, and compliance management capacity to deliver services on time and on budget, and show that a citizen complaint policy is in place. 2. Readiness to proceed and viable production plan. To meet this criteria, the applicant must show evidence for how the proposed program or project will mobilize and operate in a timely manner. 3. Proposes cost reasonable budget. To meet this criteria, the proposal budgets must reflect cost reasonableness and affirmative efforts to leverage CDBG-DR funds with additional funding to address unmet needs. The budget narrative must reflect research, quotes, and/or contracted pricing. 4. Storm resilience. In addition to addressing unmet needs, Program or project proposals need to show how they make investments that improve resilience to future storm-related damage. 5. Overall LMI benefit, or percent LMI benefit of the activity. Higher LMI benefit activities will receive higher scores. For example, a project with 100% LMI benefit would be scored higher than a project with 65% LMI benefit. 6. Vulnerable populations. Applications which address vulnerable populations will receive higher scores. This includes the special needs of persons who are not homeless but require supportive housing. Please note that applications that have not been signed will not be considered. DEO will provide one-on-one technical assistance, or TA calls, to voluntary home buyout program applicants. You may reserve a time for a one-on-one TA call by emailing Joshua Brott at deo.myflorida.com. We will now take some time to answer any questions you may have. You may submit questions by typing them in the question box. I am joined by Joshua Brott and Ryan Butler from DEO's Office of Disaster Recovery team to assist in answering questions. And as a reminder, slides and transcripts will be posted after today's webinar.
Hello, this is Joshua Brott with DEO's Rebuild Florida. I'm the program manager for the Hurricane Michael Voluntary Home Buyout Program. So we have a question being asked. Would you please clarify if properties in SFHAs or high-risk flood areas without documented damage from Hurricane Michael still qualify? All of the properties must have received damage by Hurricane Michael, regardless of their location. And you want to make sure you're able to document that damage with a certified damage inspection. Also, as a quick reminder, if you have questions, please type them into the question box. And to the best of my ability, I'll be able to then give you an answer in real time. All right, we have a question. We at the county are working with our colleagues in a local municipality to coordinate on our public outreach. Can we co-host an informational meeting to inform our residents about the grant application, or do we need to host two separate meetings? Yes, a public hearing may be co-hosted. There's no need to hold separate meetings. However, the posting of the public application requiring the 14-day comment period, that must be separate and specific to each municipality. All right, next question. Can you explain how matching will work? So there's two types of matching. So we do have funding that can be applied for, which will essentially serve as match for other hazard mitigation assistance programs. So if you take the HMGP program, the FEMA HMGP program, typically through that program, once an application is approved, or I'm sorry, to apply for an application, a municipality would need to come up with, let's say, 25% of 100% number in order to qualify for that program. So in order to get the 75% that FEMA provides, you could identify the 25% match being available to you through this program. We have a question. We're planning to apply for the buyout program. Should we put the information for the city or the county in the application? So the important thing there is whichever unit of local government who will be taking the responsibility for administering the program would enter its information. Give me just a second. Okay, so this next question, I might need to get some clarification on this. So I would ask that you submit your question via email after the webinar is concluded. I want to make sure I understand what you're asking. It reads as, can you serve a new owner after Hurricane Michael and use the current value of the home or pre-storm value if all that can be used or pricing? I think that question has to do with, if the ownership of the property changes hands after the storm has occurred. So there is an answer to that question. I want to verify if that's actually the question. So please submit that to me, and we'll have a conversation about that offline once we get some clarification. The next question is the maximum Bay County applicant receive $5 million? So correct. I think the answer to that would be whoever is applying, whatever unit of general local government is applying for the voluntary home buyout program, the maximum amount that can be rewarded, regardless of the county or municipality that's applying, would be $5 million. Kind of tied to that question, with a one application limit, would a city located within a designated county be allowed to apply for funding, or is it one per county? So you have to pay attention to the details here. So each municipality may apply for properties within its designated area. For example, the city may apply for all properties that are located within the city limits, and then the county may also apply for all properties that are located within the county if the county and city's application do not contain a request for the same address, right? So it has to be within the city limits. Let's say if the city is applying, but you can't have any overlap of address. And also, if you need further clarification or you need a longer answer, please feel free to submit the question to me in an email. We'll get you a response there. Okay, next question. Are any pre-award costs reimbursable, specifically legal advertisements required for public comment periods, environmental review, etc.? Yes, we designate those as direct activity delivery costs, such as advertisement for public comment, court costs for recording, etc., environmental review costs, certified appraisals, certified inspectors, contractors for demolition purposes. They're all allowable costs. And all of those costs must be part of the budget that you're going to submit in the application. And all subrecipients must follow the proper procurement for all contractors, vendors hired under the CDBG-DR program to be funded. So always keep that in mind with any of your procurements. All right, next question. If a home floods routinely, but they did not apply through FEMA for some reason, can we serve them? And what must be shown for proof? So the requirement for the program is that the designated area or the county needs to have received public assistance as well as individual assistance through FEMA. But the homeowner themselves does not have to have received FEMA funding for that address previously in order to be eligible. For proof, you just want to be able to show tie back to the storm. So any damage associated with Michael needs to be documented. Often damage like that can be found through previous damage assessments done by FEMA. So in that sort of a FEMA involvement helps with that process, being that it kind of already exists out there. In order to document an address for eligibility, you would want to be able to demonstrate that the damage was caused by Michael through a damage assessment. All right, next question. Does the 14-day public notification have to be complete before the application is submitted, or can it be somewhere in the process by the time of submission / the deadline? The information that you provide in a 14-day public notification, it needs to be completed prior to the submitting of the application. The 14-day public notice with the citizens' comments are considered information that will be needed in the application under the heading of the citizen plan. All right, next question. Are there any advances available to local governments for the purchase of homes? So this is not direct funding. There's no advances that will be available for the purchase of homes. Each of those subrecipient agreements that are executed with the local municipalities, they'll follow a reimbursement model. So once, so the municipality or the unit of local government would essentially front the money for all activities and then request reimbursement for those activities from the state. All right, next question. Will LMI households that have insurance be eligible for participation in the voluntary home buyout program? So yes, houses that have insurance are eligible. However, the priority is given to those LMI individuals that do not have insurance. This basically stems from the goal of HUD funding being to serve LMI population. So we focus on that primarily. However, it does not make you ineligible if you have insurance. All right, so there's another clarifying question to do with the eligibility as it relates to the area. So it says, would you please clarify if properties in SFHAs or higher risk flood areas without documented damage from Hurricane Michael still qualify? So you have to have documented damage regardless of where the location is. All right, our next question is, can you explain the 25K housing replacement assistance and the question continues here, but it goes ... But I think I understand the question there. And the 10K housing allowance. Okay. So what we want to try to avoid is a scenario where you have a house that we are buying out, and so we, they go through the whole process, and we essentially at closing we buy out the property. What we don't want to have happen is, if at all possible, is for that homeowner to just pick up and just move out of state. The goal is to try to keep that homeowner within the same area tax base in order to sort of maintain the economy in that area. So what happens is, if a homeowner agrees to stay inside the same tax area, and the home that they are purchasing is in that area, in order to get them to stay, we provide an incentive of $25,000 on top of the pre-storm fair market value to that homeowner. And then that is for LMI persons, the 25,000 is. There's also an assistance incentive for folks, which is the $10,000, and those are for the folks that do not meet the LMI threshold, but it's for the same purpose, which is to incentivize them to purchase their new home in the same tax area. The next question that we have is there funding available to purchase vacant property in a flood hazard area that is zoned for residential housing? So vacant property must have residential housing on the site to qualify for the program. We can talk about that more if there's more to that question. But that's the answer I have for now. All right, thank you to each of you for your questions. If there are no more questions, that will conclude today's webinar. We really appreciate your attendance. I wanted to remind you that the webinar will be posted on our website following the conclusion of the presentation. And if you have any additional questions, as we mentioned before, please feel free to reach out to me via email, and we'll set up a one-on-one and we'll handle whatever questions you have. Thank you so much.